Okay, it's 5 p.m. in Berlin. Welcome everybody to our today's webinar about personalizing pharmacotherapy through individualized drug discovery calculators. My name is Martina Pavleta. I'm a data scientist at Knime in the life sciences team. I'm not an expert in what you just see as titles, so therefore I brought some experts with me. First is Dr. Shanaka, who is an associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Pharmacy. His main research focus lies on data-driven precision medicine, and very important to mention, he's a very big Knime fan, very huge, how he would say. So hi, Shanaka, welcome. Also, my second speaker today, my second guest today is Dr. Anne Message, who is an assistant professor at the VCU as well, School of Pharmacy, and her research focuses on the optimization of antibiotic dosing in special populations. And this is also a topic she will be talking today a bit more. Okay, let's get started. But before we really start with the very interesting topic, let's get started with some Q&A. Let's get started with some housekeeping. I'm sorry, I'm just too excited. So as usual, you know, there is a Q&A section where you can post your questions. You can also upvote questions that you like, that you really like to be answered. So we will tackle those questions at the end. And also important to mention, the session will be recorded or is being recorded and will be also available on YouTube afterwards. So you can rewatch it if you want to. And this is just a short screenshot of where the Q&A section is. But I'm pretty sure you most likely already know from our past webinars. Okay, so what's the goal of today's session? Today, I will start with the introduction to Knime for those of you that haven't used Knime before, that haven't seen Knime before. So I will quickly start with this. Then Shanaka will follow with showing the benefits of a low-code, no-code tool in healthcare area, and will share some experiences that he collected. This will be followed by the introduction to the Vancomycin dosing calculation, presented by Anne. And I will wrap it up at the end and share some more example workflows that we have created in the whole topic of healthcare and digital healthcare. Of course, there will be a Q&A session at the end, but please ask your question already during the presentation so I can collect it in the meantime. Maybe some of them I can already answer in the chat. So please ask the question if you have any. Okay. So let's get started. What is Knime? What is the Knime platform? So Knime is a company, software company that started on the University of Constance. This is also where the name is coming from. Knime means constant information miner. And the Knime platform is a very powerful open source tool that can be used for different kinds of data analysis, data manipulation, visualization, and reporting. And there's no need to learn another scripting language as it's based on the graphical programming paradigm. Historically, Knime became popular in the area of cheminformatics as it was having some capabilities to deal with molecules, small molecules in particular. But in the meantime, there are many extensions added to the tool that cover topics from bioinformatics, text mining, network mining, also many different algorithms available for machine learning, but also if you have some need to write some script in Java or Python, this is also possible. How does it look like? So in the Knime platform, everything is about nodes, workflows, and components. So what is a node? A node is like a colorful box that you can see on the slide. A node is having a certain functionality. It's having different it can have different input-output ports, so at every stage we see what data comes in, something is happening to the data, and then some data is coming out. If you combine those nodes together, you create a workflow. Like you can see here on the example, there's a workflow that starts with reading some Excel data, it's adding some colors to some data points, it's then splitting the data in a training and test set, so it's creating a very simple, basic machine learning model. And if you want to put pieces of the workflow that you want to reuse or maybe share with colleagues, you can encapsulate this information into components that you can see on the bottom. You might wonder where Knime is being used, and with this I collected some Knime applications, as Knime is really used in many different industries and many different departments of those industries. This can be manufacturing, this can be retail, can be the public sector or life science industry with all pharmaceutical companies. And all of those companies have a finance department, have a marketing department, for example. And this is the big advantage of Knime, as it's capable to really being used for different types of data in different areas for different use cases. Also in healthcare, and today we will focus a bit more on the healthcare topic. And therefore, I would like to hand over to Shanaka, that will share some of his experience with Knime in healthcare as a low-code, no-code tool. Shanaka, stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Martina. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. So, as you can see, we are myself and Dr. Masic, both are from Virginia Commonwealth University School of Pharmacy. We are in Richmond, Virginia. And a while ago, we ran into this problem. The problem being the need to personalize pharmacotherapy. Now, why is this a problem? If you look at clinical trials to identify the efficacy of novel pharmacotherapeutic agents, there's a certain population, that population to which the drug is targeted. And you try to get as representative a population, but we all know that when you look at clinical trials, there's no equivalent representation of all different types of people in a clinical trial. And when this medication or pharmacotherapeutic agents is being applied in real world, we run into the problem where we are deviating from this population on which the drug is tested. For example, that drug might now be used on children, in older people, and we all know the problem all of us are facing, expanding waistlines. These are different kind of people. And we being humans, we like to go where nature did not evolve us to be, like going into space and so on. Microgravity is a huge problem because drug distribution in microgravity is different from drug distribution on Earth. So that also creates this special population. So we have this population for which the drug was primarily tested on, but out in the wild, we have all these different specialized populations the drug is going to be used in. So there's a mismatch here. And this mismatch is where you need personalized pharmacotherapy. You need somebody to take this information that you got from the first clinical trials and start adapting it to the specialized populations. Now, Dr. Masic is going to go into more detail about the actual pharmacokinetics and factors that affect it. So I'm not going to go into more detail, but I just wanted to give you guys a generalized picture that here's a population that the drug has been targeted for, and out in the real world, there are different populations that the drug needs to be used at, and you need dose adjusting to accommodate for it. By the way, if you're wondering why all those images are looking weird, I could not find enough Creative Commons 4 images, so I went and used DALL-E, and I asked DALL-E to create a cartoon of normal people, and this is what it created. So apparently that's how DALL-E looks at us. So I do apologize in advance if the images look a little bit weird. All right, so now we understand that there's a need for personalized pharmacotherapy. But this need is even bigger than what I mentioned, because we are getting new drugs into the market all the time. If you look at the new drugs that came into market from 1993, and you can see that there's been a steady kind of increase in new molecular entities, new biologic agents coming to market. So on the one hand, we have medications standard medications or the legacy medication that need to be adapted for different populations. And on the other hand, we are getting new medications coming into the market all the time. So this calculating the optimum dose for special populations is a continuously evolving challenge because we have all these new drugs coming into market. Now, if we are to rely on existing calculations to come up with solutions for these new drugs coming to market, that's not going to be a sustainable solution. We actually need skills, or we have to train our healthcare professionals with the skills for creating drug dosing calculations as they need for the special population that they're working with. And this kind of creates some additional problems because typically we use something like R and Python to create our data workflows. And that's not going to work in the busy healthcare curriculum where we are trying to train students all the basics they need to learn before they go and start practicing, or in a busy clinician's life because they do not have time to learn all these skills. So we have to come up with a different way of tackling this problem. And essentially what we need is a new generation of pharmacists as digital health ninjas. I call them digital health ninjas because they need this skill set, the digital health skill set that is specialized towards creating personalized pharmacotherapy. And this was a challenge that we had. We know that personalized pharmacotherapy is needed. We are not training people to create these calculators that they need to enable personalized pharmacotherapies, and we need to solve that problem. Now, before we get to that problem, what about existing calculators? Why can't you just train the students use existing calculators, right? Well, several problems. Some are paid versions. They are expensive. And most of the time they are pretty black box because that's their bread and butter. Software as a service is their bread and butter. They do not want to let you know the inner workings of their algorithms. There are also these things where they might be here today, and if they're not profitable, they'll be gone tomorrow. So it's not a stable solution. If you look at, there are other calculators, the free online versions. These have unproven reliability. They are again, most of the time, black box. They may be here today and gone tomorrow. And with the advertising that they place on the pages, you really don't feel comfortable using them because you don't know what else you're going to be downloading just by visiting those pages. And even the best ones, like the AHA calculators that they had, they sunset without giving us enough advance notice. So these free online versions are also not a good option to solve this problem. How about open source versions? Now, of course, they are no longer black box, right? But then you need to be a computer scientist to understand the code behind it, be able to interpret it, be able to adapt it. You need an expert. So these are not easily adaptable. So the open source versions, typically those written with R, Python, C#, C++, whatever, is not a solution for healthcare professionals to create these calculators as they need. This, you might be surprised, is actually a thing that using Excel sheets for calculating optimum drug doses. This does not allow uniform deployment, and one person might create the Excel sheet, another person might use it, and somewhere an error can creep in, and then there's no way of knowing if the person who created it in the first place cannot maintain reliable version controlling. So these are problems with existing calculators, and one of the biggest calculators are, most of them are only for common medications. With new medications coming to market all the time, narrow therapeutic index medications coming to market, you need to be able to create new calculators, but the existing ones typically lag behind the new medications coming to market. And the other problem, most of the time, these are difficult to verify. So existing calculators, while they provide some functionality, actually ends up creating long-term headaches. Not short-term solutions they will give, but long-term, it's not a good solution. Okay, if these are the problems with existing calculators, what would we look for in a calculator if we can build it from scratch? Yeah. Ideally, we would want a standard platform that can be used for creating any personalized pharmacotherapy calculator, as well as any application relevant to healthcare. Because students and clinicians don't have time to learn all these multiple different platforms. They want one standard, stable platform that they can apply to solve most of their clinical problems, including pharmacotherapy calculations. Another feature would be the workflows that they create for solving these problems need to be understandable by non-computer scientists. Essentially, somebody who had no knowledge of computer science should be able to read the workflow and get a basic understanding of what's going on there. The other point, of course, it has to be open source, because we need to be able to dig into the code to see if and when it's needed, an expert should be able to dig into the code and understand it. And then these calculators need to be easily deployed as a web application for larger testing, because somebody might create a calculation, a clinician might create a calculation, that's great, but then now the rest of the hospital system would want to use it. But how do you deploy it in a version controlled manner? Which brings me to the next need, proper version controlling. So the calculators that we are creating, or the clinician or the student is creating, should be easily deployable across a larger platform for large-scale testing, validation, and ultimately deployed for use. Ideally, they should have reusable components. So for example, if I create a component for calculating BMI, I don't want to recreate that if I need that component in another application. Ideally, I would want to take that component and plug it into the next application that I need BMI as one of the inputs, right? This decreases the amount of work that you have to do. And that brings us to daisy chaining of components. Let's have a bunch of components that we need, and we just connect them together as we need to obtain the goals of the calculator. And the most important thing, I think, is it should be easy to teach to students and healthcare professionals with no coding background. For us, this was the winning combination. Now, what met our needs? Knime. Some of you probably know about Knime and some of you may not, but I highly recommend you guys playing around with this. Matches our needs, no coding needed. Perfect. It is open sourced. It's very easy to create data transformation workflows, and the workflows are easy to comprehend by non-computer scientists. The other thing I really like about Knime is they have standardized learning modules that you can do at your own pace and get up to speed really fast. With Knime, it's very easy to create interactivity, easy to create report, and the actual workflow that you create can be easily deployed as a web application for larger testing. All the students I trained in Knime love it. It allows what is called functional prototyping and rapid iterative testing. What do I mean by that? When the students start a Knime project, they like to draw it out on a whiteboard. They create a flow chart of the sequence of events that lead from the data to the result that they want. Once they have that flow chart in place, it takes them very little time to convert that into an actual functional prototype. And this is what excites students the most. They are not spending time learning the syntaxes of R, Python, C++, C#, or anything like that. They are going from, this is my idea, this is the data set that I have, this is a problem I need to solve, these are the steps I need to take the data and transform it to a solution. Great, now that I have that, let's go ahead and convert it. So we had a problem, the need for personalized pharmacotherapy. We figured out that the existing calculators are not gonna solve this problem. We knew that we had to create new calculators. We found a platform that we can use to create these calculators, and we tested it and we found that students love it. So how did we end up training the students? Well, we ran into another problem there because the healthcare curriculum is tightly packed. There's no breathing room for something new. So we knew that at the beginning, at least for the first and second years, we had to teach this in an extracurricular manner, meaning they're going to learn this outside of the classroom. So the students took the initiative and they created this organization called Pharmacists for Digital Health. Ms. Emily Ko and Mr. Amir Bedani were the first co-founders of this, and now it has become a true nonprofit where they're trying to teach this technique outside of School of Pharmacy and across the globe. And these where the students are learning Knime and Knime related concepts and brainstorming in an extracurricular mean. Then we created a 2-credit elective for their third year, P3, called Introduction to Data Science and Rapid Prototyping. Then there's a research elective that students can take, 1 to 2 credit, and it can be a semester long, where they tackle a research project. Then for the 4th year students, we created this advanced pharmacy practice elective on digital health. And finally, we created a playground, a large area that the students can come together, brainstorm, draw things out on a whiteboard, and then the computers are there for them with the right version of Knime, so they can quickly go there and start converting their flowchart into a functional flowchart or functional prototype. And we were helped by the Knime self-paced learning. And as soon as they're done with this, we put the students on actual clinical problems. And the students love it because they want to be clinicians, but they want to also incorporate information technology to make their lives better when they actually become clinicians. And this has worked out pretty well for us. And Knime does allow us to rapidly prototype and create optimized dose calculations. Here's Ms. Courtney Cheroka, the first of our APP Digital Health Rotation Block 1, came to us with no coding experience. And within 5 weeks, she created this amazing total parental nutrition calculator. Ms. Danielle Holdren, that Dr. Masic will be, whose work that led to the presentation by Dr. Masic today. Again, the same thing, no coding experience, 5 weeks, and they're up to speed. They are creating calculators that are of clinical strength. Malik Gravis, the 3rd rotation block. He also created something that is amazing. So these guys got 5 weeks solid training, and at the end of 5 weeks of solid training, that's what they created. What about with the extracurricular means, students learning outside of the classroom? Well, Ms. Emily Ko, who was learning these outside of the classroom, actually managed to create some interesting Knime-based components that we are now incorporating into a platform. She created a data dashboard for monitoring chronic conditions in low-income communities. So Ms. Ko actually worked with me for 2 years. Sometimes I get asked the question, well, how fast can somebody go from a concept to an actual Knime product? And I do have an answer for that. The answer is 24 hours. 24 hours is what it took for this group of students to actually create a pharmacogenetics consulting application using Knime, in the sense that they can take into account the polymorphisms in drug metabolizing enzymes, check against an existing database for the drugs that it affects, and provide a recommendation. This was an incredibly complex application that they built in 24 hours. So this kind of concept to product, I have only seen with students using Knime when they don't have a sufficient coding background. Amir is a little bit of a coding expert, but still he used Knime to achieve that goal. And even he would be the first to say that he can get this knocked out faster using Knime than anything else. All righty. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ann Message now, and she's going to be talking about the project that Daniel Holden worked on, which is a Vancomycin dosing calculator. And you'll be able to see how efficient it is and what its clinical relevance is from Dr. Message. Dr. Message, all yours.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let me get my screen. Okay, so I want to shift gears and take a little bit of a step back, just as the clinical pharmacist of the group, talk a little bit about how important these calculators are and how they translate into actual patient care. So what we've seen in today's medicine is that we as providers, as clinical pharmacists, are providing care to much more complex patients with multiple medical conditions, as well as on drugs or have disease states that have complex management involved. And so clinical calculators have really had a positive impact in our practice. They help provide clinical efficiency. So, for example, where I practice over at the health system, I cover and provide care for a minimum of 30 patients a day. That's in addition to my other responsibilities at the School of Pharmacy. So I need something that's going to help me be efficient in providing good patient care. And then these calculators have also allowed us, bring us some convenience. So many are available as mobile apps on phones or other devices. And some have been integrated into electronic medical record systems. And calculators have also helped us move and shift into the future of healthcare, right? Individualizing patient care in order to optimize our care and our outcomes. And so we're moving away from this traditional one-size-fits-all approach. And then additionally, like these calculators can help us make some of those clinical decisions if they're not dosing calculators, for example, but some may help us predict prognosis or risk for developing worsening or a chronic disease state. So it may help us, okay, this patient's high risk for this disease state or having a stroke or what have you. We can use calculators to determine their risk factors, and that may help us alter or come up with a drug therapy that's going to help minimize those risks. But I can't go without saying there are still plenty of barriers that Shanika did point out. So depending on the complexity of the calculator, it could cost a lot of money. A lot of training may be involved with how to use the calculator and then how to apply it to our patients. They should, hopefully, before they actually put out for widespread patient use and applied to patient care, they should be validated. And then, as Shanika also mentioned, a lot of our literature and clinical trials are based off of the general population. So we certainly see now a lot more patients that fit into what we consider special populations, which I'll elaborate on in just a few minutes. And then again, some barriers can also be integration within the electronic medical records system. And this is important, right? Because when we have a calculator outside of the medical record, there's a higher risk of error, input error, user error. So having that integration into these medical record systems helps minimize some of those errors. So narrowing my focus a little bit more towards the calculator that I'm going to show you today. So specifically for pharmacokinetic drug dosing calculators. So that we use these for several different patient populations, but these are typically for drugs that have a high variability in drug kinetics, meaning they may have varying absorption depending on the patient, distribution of the drug throughout the body to different organ systems, metabolism through the liver, for example, elimination through the kidneys, as well as there could be genetic factors at play. And so this is going to then lead to variable responses to the drugs between patients. We also use these calculators for narrow therapeutic index drugs. So for those of you who are not healthcare trained, these are drugs where the small differences in dose or blood concentrations of that drug could lead to failure from a treatment failure if the amount is too low, or could lead to serious adverse drug reactions if it's too high. So there's a small window that we're aiming for dosing. And so in order to ensure it's the drug's safe use and efficacy, we typically do drug monitoring for these drugs. So we check blood concentrations. And so just a few examples of drugs. So vancomycin, which is one that we are focusing on today, aminoglycosides, which is another antibiotic class, meds for seizure treatment, lithium, as well as warfarin, just to name a few. Our other uses, again, include these special populations with those pharmacokinetic changes compared to the general population. So as Shanika mentioned, our pediatrics, our older adults, our obese and critically ill populations, which I'll elaborate on those two in a second. Those who may have kidney impairment or liver impairment. And so really what's available currently are pharmacokinetic and Bayesian modeling calculators. And these are most widely available for vancomycin dosing and aminoglycoside dosing at this time that are applicable to clinical practice. So for those of you who are not clinicians, just a little bit of background on vancomycin. So it is an IV antibiotic that we use to treat severe gram-positive infections. So it's one of probably the most commonly used antibiotics in the hospital. And this is going to treat infections such as MRSA or staph infections. And so dosing is based off of, we're targeting what's called the area under the concentration curve to minimum inhibitory concentration, or an AUC to MIC ratio. And as you can see here in this image, so this is what we call a drug concentration time curve. So you have the concentration on your y-axis, the time on your x-axis. So with this curve, your drug is given, it peaks in the concentration peaks in the blood, and then it is eliminated. So this is just displaying one dose. In the dosing interval. So what we're targeting is this area right here. We want that to be a ratio of 400 to 600. And that helps us ensure that we are achieving clinical effectiveness, or the drug is working and killing the bacteria, but also minimizing renal toxicity, which is one of the major side effects of vancomycin. And so how we calculate this, I've just shown you a piece of the calculations and the equations, but as you can see, this is very time intensive when you're doing it by hand. So it's not realistic when you're a clinician like myself providing care to 30 plus patients a day. Now, given they're not all on this drug, but even just a handful on this drug can be very time intensive. And so it's not realistic in practice. So that's why it's really important for us to use PK calculators for this. And so I want to now talk through how we created the calculator that I'm going to show you. So this work started back when I was in my postgraduate training at the University of Maryland. But how we would go about creating this calculator is first, we identified, okay, what's a population that isn't being captured by currently available calculators and drug. So we chose vancomycin because one, it's a narrow therapeutic drug. The pharmacokinetics are going to be variable between patients potentially. And then because in normal practice or day-to-day practice already, common practice is to obtain drug levels and adjust dosing based on drug levels. So the lab is already set up to be able to give us blood concentrations for this drug. So check, that's easy. The niche that we identified was patients who are both obese as well as critically ill. And so these patients don't fit that normal general population because there are different changes that come with each characteristic. So patients who are obese, they tend to potentially have increased drug excretion or elimination because they have more blood flow to the kidneys, so potentially more drug being eliminated. They have higher volume of distribution, so higher fat and water content. So potentially you're going to have less drug being able to get to where it needs to go because it's so spread out. And then on the other side, with patients who are critically ill or who have sepsis, so they have a severe infection, they have an increase of volume of distribution of the drug because we are typically give them a lot of fluids as part of helping resuscitate them. They have third spacing, as well as they have decreased proteins and decreased protein binding. And then in terms of their clearance, so they potentially have increased clearance, so what we call augmented renal clearance, which is basically where patient's kidney function is in overdrive. So it's working better than it does at baseline. At the same time, though, on the flip side, and I think what we more commonly see is actually a decrease in their renal function or their kidney function. So we actually see a decrease of drug elimination. So we have identified that this is really, while there are studies with obese patients and studies with critically ill patients, there's not any with both. So that combination. So the calculator is not going to be able to account for this, right? So as part of this PK study, the next step would be to obtain drug concentrations during a drug interval. We want to see how the drug distributes and is eliminated by this patient population. So we included 16 patients, which is actually a good number for pharmacokinetic studies. You really don't need a big sample size. And we took 4 concentrations during a dosing interval. So we took a concentration about an hour after the drug finished infusing, right before the next dose was due, and then 2 random samples during that time frame. On this project, I worked with a PhD student. So he did a lot of the modeling parts and simulations. So here's just a graphic of what we saw in our samples. And then from there, developed a dosing equation that would fit this population specifically. And then Shanika's student, Danielle, then took this data, this literature, created this calculator. And then now the next step would be to actually validate it. So that's something that we are currently working on. Before I show you the actual simulation of the calculator, I'm going to hit it back to Shanika, and he's going to go over the actual build of this calculator.
Thank you, Dr. Message. All right. Share my screen again. Okay. So I want to give credit to Ms. Danielle Holden, who actually did all the work, and she's the one who read Dr. Message's paper and came up with the approach to approach on how to actually create this calculator. If you just open up the calculator, you will see this is what you're going to see at the beginning. It's a completed calculator as a single component. And at the end of it, it can also generate a report. So it can generate a BERT report or business intelligence reporting tool that is part of Knime. If you open up this component, you will see that that single component is made out of two components: the area under the curve estimation component and the patient baseline inputs and initial molecular initial maintenance dose component. And the two together is what's going to go into the data that's going to be reported back. So let's take a look at the patient's baseline inputs and initial maintenance dose component. And if you open that component, this is what you're going to see. In blue are all the widgets that allows interactions, including the tile widget that lays it out. And you have a bunch of nodes within this, and I'm not going to go into this in detail, but each of these nodes actually carry out a specific function. But what's different here from standard programming or Python-based approach is even a layperson can look at this and see the information flow, see how these switches are working, and see how the directionality of the workflow changes based on certain criteria. The workflow has been made available to everyone on the digital health space on Knime Hub. So it's shared under Creative Commons license. You guys can download it and start playing around with it if you want. But this is the single component. This is the maintenance. I'm sorry. This is for the AUs. No, these are the maintenance dose calculation. Then if you open up the component for area under the curve estimation, again, you will see the tiles and the tile view and the widgets that are being used for interactivity. And most of the calculations happen here. And the equations that Dr. Message was talking about is distributed within the different nodes, within the math formula nodes inside this. Again, feel free to download this, play around with it. And if you want to use it, please give credit to Ms. Holden for all her, Ms. Holden and Dr. Message for all their hard work. And these components together, now when you open this as a web applications, you're not going to see these components because you really don't want people to see this. You want the final result. And that's what you will see when Dr. Message is demonstrating this, that what the end user sees is only these interactions, where they can interact, they can calculate, and they can generate a final report. So from a perspective of somebody who wants to deploy a solution that is, I would say, tamper-proof for use by end users, Knime kind of solved that problem for us. And the fact that the workflows are easily readable means that other people can download this workflow and create their own versions of it for their own special populations without having to redo the entire workflow, but by modifying some of the nodes within those components. I am going to hand this back to Dr. Message, where she will give you a demonstration, live demonstration of how this works. Dr. Message?
All right, so students always like it when I actually apply, use patient cases to apply this. So before we get into the calculator, just to throw out an example. So we have a 30-year-old male with a history of IV drug use, comes into the emergency department. He has severe leg pain, lots of purulent drainage. He's altered, he's hemodynamically unstable. So the medical team decides, okay, he's sick. He needs to go to the ICU to be treated for sepsis. So this patient has a lot of potential variables that will, could shape his vancomycin dosing. So he's a young male, so they tend to naturally eliminate vancomycin quickly. He's an IV drug user, so we know IV drug use is associated with increased metabolism of vancomycin. And he's severely ill, so he has some of those PK changes like I previously mentioned in regards to sepsis. So in thinking about his initial vanc dose, I take those factors into play, but also some of his objective information. So he's obese guy, and so that's right. So critically ill, obese, he fits our population for this calculator. And another thing I want to point out that's I'm going to take into consideration as a clinician is the fact that his serum creatinine, which is a measure of kidney function, has increased from his baseline of 0.7. Not very much, but it could mean that he may be starting to show signs of some renal dysfunction. So as I also tell students, yes, calculators are great. They help me do my job, but also you still have to use your clinical mind. So let me share the actual calculator now. Let's see here. So I have all of this patient's objective data.
And I think you stopped sharing.
Yeah, I'm switching over to the
okay, great.
The calculator. I gotta find it.
Okay.
So I'm moving through so many windows. All right, I think this is the one. Okay, so as you can see here, this is the calculator. I've already inputted his objective data just to save time. So he's our male, 30 years old. Here's his height, weight, heights in centimeters. Here's current serum creatinine. You'd calculate it. Over here in this box, it spits out so his potential creatinine clearance, which for him clinically, this is probably not accurate. Like I said, his serum creatinine's gone up a little bit. This is just my clinical mind thinking. We have his weight, all that kind of stuff. But what's important is here, this initial maintenance dose calculation. So we have a lower range and a higher range. This is in milligrams. So anywhere from 3,900 milligrams to 5,800 milligrams would be his total daily dose. So we divide that up into anywhere from once daily, twice daily, 3 times daily, sometimes 4 times daily. Typically for adults though, I stick to, for this range of dosing would stick to like every 12 hours or every 8 hours. So I already figured out our possible dosing regimens for this particular patient initially would be either 1,500 milligrams every 8 hours or 2,000 milligrams every 12 hours. And so me as a clinician, again, like that's nice, it's been calculated, but now we got to, okay, make sure this is still appropriate for the patient. Like I mentioned, he potentially has some renal dysfunction and is, showing signs of it now. So in that case, I would probably start with the 2,000 milligrams every 12 hours. And that'll just give him more time to eliminate that dose. So then we can come down here and we have our dose. And once he's been on this regimen now for 3 doses. So we're going to actually check some levels. So I'm going to change to what his dose was, 2,000 milligrams every 12 hours. This dose infuses over 2 hours. So we would get a peak for this, how this calculator is set up currently. We would do 2 levels and then do calculations from there. So we get a peak level and a trough level. So I'm going to change this trough. We'll say 8. So, and then those are the levels. And then this will be the time for when those levels were drawn, which is really important in relation to that dose that was given. So this is 2 hours after that dose was started. And then this trough collection time would be at 10 hours. So 10 hours after that dose. So not quite a true trough, but that's okay. So we're going to calculate. And so here we have our AUC estimation. So our goal is 400 to 600. So this actually is a little bit under. So that just means that we need to adjust his dose a little bit. And then it gives you some pharmacokinetic parameters. It calculates what our true trough and peak are estimated to be. So you can see here, it adjusted to a true trough, even though the level wasn't drawn at a true trough level. Some other pharmacokinetic stuff, and then sort of our summary of what we did. So then after that, you can click next, download the report. And then this will show you what you just inputted, so you can print it out. So it'll give you your baseline inputs, your pharmacokinetic parameters, which could be important, and then what your area under the curve estimation is, so that final output. All right, so that is all from me.
Thanks a lot. That was really great. It's a really great piece of work. Let me share again, because I have some more things prepared for the last part. So for all the participants, if you are wondering where you can find the workflow that was just presented by Anne and Shanaka, it's on the digital healthcare Hubspace that we have on the community hub. So the link is added on the slides. There is a dedicated space that we use to collect different use cases in the area of digital healthcare. It started like a collaboration between the VCU and Knime. And so there are some other calculators as well, like for total parental nutrition or some measurements for kidney health, for example. But also we worked on some other use cases related to text mining or dealing with patient data or dealing with the FDA adverse event reporting system, for example. That is also a bit tricky in terms of the dealing with this big amount of data as well. Let me quickly show you 2 more examples before we start with Q&A. One of the examples was mainly an experiment. So Shanaka came and asked, oh, by the way, can Knime deal with EPIC data? Well, like with HL7 data, which is like a standard for storing patients' data in healthcare. And we basically run an experiment with this because we don't have a dedicated reader that is like an HL7 reader. And we started an experiment in order to check whether Knime can deal with this. So as those HL7 formats tend to be pretty complex, tools became famous like Epic on Fire that are able to translate between the HL7 standard into a typical web service format. And web services is something that Knime can do pretty well. So we just created a very simple example where we take some data from the Epic on Fire sandbox, including some tokens, and then we do some web service GET requests and pull some data into Knime to show as a basic example how this could look like if you want to create a data application like something that Anne just showed. And this could be like a first step before you use the calculator. So maybe you have some data from the lab that's already in a database in the hospital, and then in the next step you can just pull the data in automatically and then do some further calculations. There's a blog post available on this if you want to read more, just added links. Another example where I'm a big fan of because of the text mining part in it, it's actually literature research, and it's in this case focusing on the drug adverse events in relation to ethnicities. Why is this interesting? So often the balanced representation of different ethnic groups in clinical trials are difficult to achieve. So medications, once approved, are used to treat ethnic groups on which the medications are not tested. And so this, of course, can lead to some adverse events, some adverse drug events, and this can be caused by different variations in genetic polymorphism, but not going into details about this today. Quickly just mentioning the workflow. It starts with 2 options. So you can add a drug name and also an adverse event, and then we are searching through 2 different sources in this example, and also adding some highlighting in the text so directly can see where the relevant information is added. It's using different kinds of synonyms and dictionaries and ontologies to create as good query as possible for the search. Of course, it can be extended with some other sources. They could be Google Scholar, they could be clinicaltrials.gov as additional sources as well. So it's like a basic example workflow that should demonstrate how this can be done in Knime. And with this, if you are curious to learn more about Knime, there's a webpage that shows, that collects all the information that you need to get started. There's some documentation, there are example workflows, there are self-paced training, as already mentioned by Shanaka, pretty useful to get started with learning about Knime. Also, if you should have questions after this webinar, if you have some topics you want to discuss, there's the forum. First, a good place to ask questions anyway. And there's a dedicated thread called events. And in this thread, we created another thread about this webinar where you can simply go and ask your questions if you are looking for some more information. If you have some ideas to improve our workflows, we are happy to discuss this in this forum. Okay, and now it's time for question. Let's see what the Q&A section says. Okay, there's a question from Suman. Do we need Knime Enterprise Edition for the web-based application? So actually what Anne was demoing was already deployed. It was a deployed workflow on the Knime server. So therefore, this wasn't the Knime Analytics platform anymore, but still you could create components and use them directly from within Knime. So this is also possible, but of course, the more convenient way would be to use Knime Server or Knime Business Hub.
If I can chime in
yeah, sure.
a little bit, Martina. Web-based application is great when you're actually trying to deploy it to a larger group. But if you're doing small-scale testing, just the desktop application itself, just telling people not to go and start poking inside there and changing things would actually work. And that's how we started. We started with the desktop application. We just distributed it among different groups. We started testing it, and once we wanted to do demonstrations, that's the time that we put it up into the server. So you can get started, and you can go a long way with the desktop application. But of course, if you want to do large-scale distribution, you need a server-based or the enterprise application.
Thanks, Shanaka. As there are no other questions in the Q&A, maybe I will ask another question. So Shanaka, how difficult was it to train students?
Well, it was actually pretty easy. In fact, the challenge I have is when we do the 2-credit elective, I'm supposed to teach a whole lot of other things in addition to Knime. They just don't want to move away from that because they intuitively grasp how to create solutions for clinical problems, and they love brainstorming and going through it. So training students turned out to be very, very easy. I've tried training students using R. I've tried training students using Python, and I could not move beyond getting them to understand the syntaxes. With Knime, they immediately dive into the clinical problem and start creating solutions. So training students is very easy, probably the easiest among everything that I have tried so far.
Sounds good. Okay, with this, we are already at the end of the presentations. Thank you very much for the attendance. Thank you very much to my speakers for being the presenters today. Yeah, see you next. See you soon. Let's say like this. There are new webinars and then next webinar coming in soon. I'm just saying toxicology, computational toxicology is coming using Knime. So check our event website and see you soon. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thanks, Martina. Thanks, Anne.